What's up everybody, my name is Sawyerhartman and today I have the brand new Canon EOS R full frame mirrorless camera. So does it suck or is it worth the money? Let's find out. Oh my god, does it feel so good to be home in my little studio for a few days. I've successfully made it back from the island of Maui with the Canon EOS R fully in hand, and I've had about 6 days now of shooting on this camera, and boy do I have a lot to talk about today. Now, we've been waiting for a Canon to come out with a mirrorless camera for what feels like 100 years, but they've finally done it. Have they done it well? Have they done it passably? Is this worth owning? That's what today's video is about, is what are the strengths of this camera? What are the weaknesses? We don't care about stats. You could have Googled that and saved yourself a hell of a lot of time. Today's video is from someone who's been shooting on this camera for a week now. Is it worth owning? So, without further ado, let's just dive into it because God knows we have a lot to talk about today. They say expectations are the death of all happiness, but with this camera, that might actually not be true at all. And that's primarily because I had extremely low expectations for this camera from the get-go when I heard it was coming out. I was actually on the plane to Hawaii to see the unveiling of this camera when it got leaked. And just like every other photographer out there, I started looking at these stats going, 30 megapixel mirrorless, that could be interesting. New lens mount, what the are you thinking, Canon? Honestly, that was my honest impression because 90% of the reason I believe photographers that are with Canon stay with Canon is because they're so heavily invested in Canon lenses. And by taking steps to replace the lens mount means in time photographers will need to buy all new lenses, which would give them the opportunity to leave Canon. I also had extremely low expectations because anytime a company or a person tries to get in on what someone else is doing. Now, I'm pretty sure you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say Canon has not led the world in mirrorless camera sales the last couple years. It's their biggest competitor. So when I heard Canon was coming out with their very own full frame mirrorless, I thought, oh God, I hope they don't copy them. But maybe I should have watched what I said a little bit because there's a couple things that I wish they had copied. Half of me wanted this to be a new 1DX replacement with 120 frames, which means I could move to a camera this size as my everyday shooter. And then the other half of my expectations were like, oh my God, I think they're gonna mess up right here. But those were just my expectations. I'm sure some people had some very, very different expectations for this camera. But anyway, let me just get into what it felt like shooting with this camera day one. When I first got my hands on this camera, the first thing that went through my head is, holy crap, the build quality is astonishing. This camera weighs about as much as a 5D4, maybe even a little bit more. The camera is magnesium alloy, it's metal, it's solid, it's weather sealed, and it just feels really, really expensive. Now the price tag on it is like $2,300, but as you can see, they really kind of got the lines right on this. As far as like Canon cameras are concerned, this kind of looks like the Lamborghini of Canon cameras. Also, something that just caught me off guard completely is there is no more joystick on this camera. But now we have this little trackpad scrolly thing. And apparently if you hold your finger on the actual trackpad, it unlocks it and just the functionality can be changed to be whatever you want. I personally did not like it. Straight off the bat, I put my finger on it. I was like, what the hell is this? I want my joystick back. People are gonna ask why I have these opinions instead of just saying them. Fine, fair enough. When I shoot on my camera, my thumb rests there for stability. Well, now instead of my thumb resting on a joystick that can move my focus points, it's resting on a touchscreen thing that is just really registering that my finger is there. Now, Canon has assured me it can be turned off, but then I just don't have anything there. Now, this camera also totes that it has dual pixel CMOS autofocus, which if you don't know, is the same autofocus that can be found in the 1DX. But I was actually a little shocked to find that the autofocus on this camera when it comes to video is a tiny bit clunkier. Anyone who's used a 1DX knows very well that the autofocus is very smooth and fluid. Autofocus on this camera, while accurate, isn't as smooth. It kind of lurches towards what it's trying to focus at. Now, someone on Instagram had told me I can go into the settings and actually change the speed of the autofocus, so I tried that. And while they were correct, you can change the speed and smoothness of the autofocus. Unfortunately, you cannot change the speed or smoothness of autofocus when using face tracking autofocus, which is exactly what we want to be using. Now, some people might not see this as a problem. I definitely see it as something that makes this no longer comparable to a 1DX. There's other things too, like its lack of 120 frames in 1080 and other things that make it so I just won't ever switch to this over my 1DX. Now, granted, the 1DX is almost 3 times as expensive, but these are features that we see in the competitors of this camera all the time. And part of me was just kind of hoping that Canon would have been smart enough to include it in their own camera. Now, I was really happy with the flip out touch LCD screen. Not only is it really accurate and easy to use, but you can flip it around and finally vlog on a full frame camera. Now, I know you've been able to do that on the 6D Mark II, but there's tons of places where this camera just tramples the 6D Mark II. But I honestly don't even see a need for Canon to continue making the 6D Mark II now. Now, somewhere that I was extremely let down. Finally, Canon made a camera with CMOS autofocus in 4K with a flip out screen, which is every vlogger's dream, except when you shoot 4K on this camera, you're not getting full frame. All of your footage has a 1.7 crop. No matter what lens you're using at home, if you want to shoot on this camera in 4K, you have to take the focal length of the lens you have and multiply it by 1.7, which means you're going to need a damn near fisheye lens to be able to vlog on this camera in 4K, which is just such a letdown, because if it had done full frame 4K, this might possibly have been the best vlogging camera on the market right now. It definitely would have been the best vlogging camera from Canon. But unfortunately, having a 1.7 crop in 4K completely takes it out of the race. Now, part of the image quality that I saw off this camera and lens could be because it has an over 30 megapixel image sensor. The 50mm 1.2 that is on this camera right now is quite possibly the sharpest lens and best image quality combination that I've ever seen come off a camera. Seriously, I have no idea why, but images that I took on this camera, when you zoom in all the way to the eye, are still perfectly crisp. So if you're looking for a Canon camera that is going to be used for photo only, you don't really need much video, you want to focus on really sharp photos, this very well could be the camera you want to go home with. I've been keeping notes all week to make sure all of my thoughts stay in order. Hashtag ADD problems. Now, quickly, something for all of the people out there that do care about this sort of thing. The camera only has one SD card slot, no backup slots, no dual slots. Now, I know the internet erupted when they found this out, but in all honesty, I've never used the second card slot on my 1DX. Seriously, every single creator in Hawaii was just complaining and complaining that this camera only has one card slot. But I just kind of kept my mouth shut because I didn't really see what the big deal was. Now, the other cool thing about this camera that I realized within like 10 minutes of using it is it has this little barn door thing that actually shuts off the mirrorless sensor when you're not using it. How cool is that? Now, granted, if you still drop something into this sensor, it is going to mess it up, but this will actually really cut down on how much dust, sand, and debris naturally gets into your sensor. Now, there's tons more stats I could get into of what it was actually like shooting on this camera. I'll mention a few of them later, but what's really important to take away is this camera, if you haven't been able to tell, is kind of riddled with really, really good features that are held back for some reason in some way or another, such as finally getting eye tracking autofocus, but only in single shot, so you can't use continuous shot eye autofocus, which every other competitor has. Now, Canon has informed me that this should be available via a firmware upgrade later on, but come on, launch with it, why not? But the camera does have the ability to shoot 30 frames a second in 4K video, 60 frames a second in 1080p, and 120 frames a second in 720. Now, for anyone following me that does find those stats quite impressive, just keep in mind, my Canon M50 shoots those exact same frame rates. So in all honesty, I was expecting a little bit more. Now, in terms of lens mount, this camera actually sports the new RF lens mount, which is completely new from Canon. I also think it's really interesting and important to point out that the last time Canon switched their lens mount was in 1987, 31 years ago, when they came out with the EF lens mount that can be found on the 1DX Mark II. Now, back in 1987, Canon actually came out with this new mount because it allowed them to be able to make faster lenses. Well, according to Canon, that is the same reason that they've come out with this new RF mount, is it can make faster and sharper lenses without increasing the weight too much. On one hand, the lenses that I've used for this mount are really, really great, and Canon promises that they're going to be able to even make faster lenses than they have now, not too far into the future. But on the other hand, I'm almost scared that they're moving in this new direction, because it means the 20 Canon EF lenses that I have, within 5 to 10 years, are probably going to start getting phased out. Now, I did bring this concern up to Canon. I was actually very happy to find out that the lens adapter to be able to use EF lenses on this new RF body are only going to be $100 and restrict functionality 0%. Canon actually said that is going to enhance functionality of the EF lenses on this new body because it's going to add a few things. But there will also be 2 additional adapters, one of which you can drop filters in so that you don't need different ND filters for all your lenses. You can just drop the filter behind the lens, which is brilliant. And then there'll be another adapter that actually includes an additional function ring that we've never had before. You'll notice on this prime lens, not only is there a focusing gear, but there's another new function ring that can be programmed from the camera. So now you'll be able to switch your white balance and ISO and all sorts of other stuff just by moving a ring on the lens. Now, just to fly through the rest of the stats, photography-wise, this camera shoots 8 frames per second in single autofocus. But for some reason, the second you switch to continuous autofocus, the camera actually drops down to 5 frames per second. Now, I don't really know what this means, but this camera says that it has 5,655 autofocus points. But God knows, when I look through the viewfinder, I do not see 5,655 options of places to focus. I would love to test that out if that's true. But for wedding photographers, people who care about silent shooting, this camera does have the ability to shoot silently, but it only shoots silent in single burst photo. For anybody asking, this camera does come with C-Log already equipped into it. You're not gonna have to buy it extra or hack your camera like I've had to do with my 1DX. You will be able to shoot a flat cinematic color profile right in the camera. And for the very last stat that I care about, this camera does have focus peaking. So anybody using manual focus lenses or using video where they're actually focusing themselves, manual focus does have focus peaking, which just means what's in focus in your image will be traced in a color of your choice. A really great pro feature that we don't even have in the 1DX Mark II. I've honestly made myself a little sick talking about stats this much. It's like talking about how much horsepower is in your car. If you don't know how to drive that car, you're still gonna get beaten in a race every single time. But enough with stats. Let's move into the last final question that's on everyone's mind. Why would you buy this camera, and where does it fit in your lineup of possibly already existing cameras? Well, that was actually a really big question I had. Originally, I thought this might be a 1DX Mark II alternative in a smaller form factor without a mirror. I was wrong. According to Canon, this camera is not a 5D replacement, it's not a 1DX replacement, it's not even a 6D Mark II replacement, but they see this camera as an extra body that you add to your already existing Canon kit. Now, I for one call BS, so here's where I firmly believe this camera will fit into your life. If you're an up-and-coming photographer who does not own higher than a 6D Mark II. So you are not on a full frame camera, and if you are, you're at the 6D Mark II level, which is just the basic entry level. If you are who I just described and you are looking to upgrade cameras while staying in the Canon family, this is the perfect camera for you. It's going to be able to provide you with a ton of the functionality that you're currently missing out on, as well as all the Canon lenses you've owned from your previous cameras will be able to be used on here for just an extra $100. Now, the other side of the fence where this could fit into your workflow is if you do already own like a 1DX Mark II and you're looking for a full frame camera with a flip out screen so that you can see yourself talking to camera occasionally. When I sit in this type of environment right now and I can look over to the side and see myself, this is a setting where I will be using this over the 1DX Mark II almost every single time now. But do I see this camera just being an extra little thing you buy and put in your bag of already existing cameras? No. It just wouldn't make sense. You'd most likely wait because this is not going to be the last mirrorless camera with an RF mount. From what it sounded like, they're already kind of thinking up what the next two versions are going to be. And one of them might even kind of be like a 1DX replacement, which would make me so excited. But Canon, congratulations on your first attempt at mirrorless. I'm very, very impressed. You got some great features in this camera, and I cannot wait to see what you create next with this technology. I believe that camera might be the camera that I'm looking for. And now I'm gonna put the ball in your court. What do you think about this new camera? Do you have any expectations? Do you have any experience with mirrorless? Which mirrorless do you like? Why? Go leave it in the comments right now. Let's just start a conversation. And if you guys want to take this even further, feel free to follow me on Instagram at sawyerhartman, where you can follow my day-to-day life and see just tons more content that I'm constantly creating. And for today, that is it. I'll let you go, get on with your day, but before I go, remember, stay motivated, stay inspired, and never stop creating. And I'll see you guys on Thursday. Peace.